Muslims and Christians point their fingers at each other and claim that they have done evil things in the name of their religion. But this argument does little in demonstrating which religion is true, Islam or Christianity. But the truth can be ascertained in the following two claims from Islam and Christianity. Islam claims that Muhammad is the supreme example for all human beings to follow. And Christianity claims that Jesus is the supreme example for all human beings to follow. And it's difficult to look at modern day Muslims and Christians and determine which one of these statements are true. Because each side has done horrible things in the past and are doing horrible things today in the name of their religion. Though it's my opinion that when Muslims do it in the name of Islam, there is some justification for their behavior because it's built into the Quran and the Hadiths. But that's another argument for another day. What I'm going to look at is two things that can really demonstrate which claim is true and thus proving which religion is true in this argument. It's because that each religion, Christianity and Islam, claims that there are groups of people who actually lived what how their teachers taught them to live. In the case of Islam, we have Muhammad and the first four rightly guided caliphs. Sunni Islam makes the claim that the first four caliphs did exactly what Muhammad taught them to do. They lived by Muhammad's example and his teachings. This is what Islam believes. And Christianity believes that the apostles that Jesus taught and the apostles that Jesus commissioned to go out into the world, they lived like Jesus taught them to live. And in each religion, in each instance, the caliphs and the apostles were propagating their religion. They were spreading their religion like their respective leaders taught them to do. So we can judge which religion is true because each makes the claim that you can tell that Jesus is the best example, or in Islam's case, Muhammad is the best example, by looking at the people they directly taught. These guys did what their teachers taught them to do. So in this video, we're going to look at the caliphs and we're going to look at the apostles. And you, dear viewer, can make the judgment which religion is true. First of all, let's look at the four rightly guided caliphs.
In the lifetime of Muhammad, his community gained the control over the Arabian Peninsula, and though he passed away in 632 AD, the religious story doesn't end there, but it is continued through his four closest followers, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali. Together, they formed the Rashidun, which means the rightly guided ones. And together, they established the first Islamic state, the Caliphate. In just 30 years, the Rashidun Caliphate had conquered all of Persia, Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Levant, and even parts of the Byzantine Empire in Anatolia.
Islam first spread, first from Muhammad and then by his four rightly guided caliphs, by wars of conquest. And then we see that Sharia law was instituted over the peoples that they conquered, and this Sharia law was what really forced people into submitting to Islam.
But it does show that the disagreements between Abu Bakr and Ali eventually transformed into two different sects of Islam, the Sunnis and the Shias. In either case, whether it's 6 months or 6 days, Ali had conceded the election. What followed shortly afterwards was that all over Arabia, the tribes and clans were seceding from their allegiance to Abu Bakr and the capital Medina. The tribal leaders argued that they had never pledged allegiance to Abu Bakr or the Ummah, but only to Muhammad himself, and with the death of the Prophet, the allegiance was now void. But perhaps the real underlying reason was the zakat, or the charity tax that the tribes paid to the treasury of Medina.
There was divisions in Islam right from the start. We see Abu Bakr, we see Uthman and Ali, all these different factions vying for power. And we see Abu Bakr coming to power by ways of just pure political maneuvering. So we see division among the Ummah, or among the Muslim community, right from the beginning, among his own pupils and the people that followed those pupils. There was violence, there was strife, there was political maneuvering, all these things just to seize power over the Ummah.
Abu Bakr responded by establishing a new religious doctrine. The idea was that if there is only one God, then there must be only one embodiment of Islam, one community, one Ummah. Secession and apostasy was declared to be treason. At the time, it seemed like a logical, short-term solution. But over the centuries, this declaration would gradually change Islam to a social political system and not just a religious belief. Within a year, the secessionist rebellion was crushed by Khalid ibn al-Walid, the primary commander and military advisor of Abu Bakr. The Caliph had regained control over Arabia and ended the First Islamic Civil War, also known as the Rida Wars. From a strategic point of view, an invasion by either the Byzantine or the Sassanid Empire was inevitable in the long term. So Caliph Abu Bakr decided to strike first. What you have to understand here is that at the time, the Arabian Peninsula was made up of numerous autonomous tribes. The Arabs were doing a lot of trading. Spices, cloth, and other goods were transported from east to west, from north to south. So the Arabs were familiar with the major trading routes and the major religions of the time. But they also understood the logistics and military tactics of their two larger neighbors. And equally important, the Caliph understood that the Sassanids and the Byzantines were exhausted from centuries-long warfare. And so Abu Bakr and his closest advisors and military commanders worked on a strategic campaign that within a few decades would lead to one of the largest empires in history. Then, one August day in the year 634, Abu Bakr, after taking a hot bath, stepped outside his house into a blast of cold wind. By nightfall, he was running a high fever, and he knew that death was near.
Abu Bakr used violence, wars of subjugation in spreading Islam. Abu Bakr was a man of violence and did whatever it took to keep his political power over the Muslim community and to spread Islam by wars of conquest and establishing Sharia law over the conquered peoples. So we see right from the beginning that the people that were taught directly by Muhammad were doing exactly what they were taught.
So he called the community's top notables and nominated Umar as his successor. Now Umar was also a close companion of Muhammad, but he was also a fierce military commander whose appearance, height and temper intimidated the people around him. So the council wasn't convinced that Umar was the right man to lead the Ummah. A discussion unfolded, and at that critical moment, Ali stepped forward and endorsed Umar. His words tipped the scales. The Ummah had elected their second Caliph, and as soon as Umar took office, he turned towards the military campaign that he and Abu Bakr had worked on earlier. The succession crisis was over. Now it was time for war and conquest.
And the second caliph, noticed that Umar did the same thing. He used violence in wars of conquest in spreading Islam and in keeping his power over the Ummah. This, my friends, is the true Islam. These guys, Islam claims, were the rightly guided caliphs. In other words, they lived out Islam just like Muhammad taught them. And it led to violence, it led to wars of conquest, and it also led to civil wars among Muslims. Muslims killing Muslims right from the beginning. Now remember, this is a video that discusses which one is true, Islam or Christianity. Islam again claims that you can know Islam is true because Muhammad is the greatest example of any person that ever lived for people to follow, and his caliphs followed him exactly, did what he wanted them to do. Now I'm asking you, my dear friends watching this video, is this true religion? Is this the way that religion should be propagated? Through violence, through seizing of power, through political maneuverings, through civil wars, through laws that oppress other people, that force them to join your religion? Is this the marks of true religion or not?
Umar, on the other hand, before his conversion to Islam, was known as a drinker and a brawler. He had a notorious temper, and he was much taller than most people around him. So the council wasn't convinced that Umar was the right person for the office. Then, in the heat of the debate, Ali stepped forward and endorsed Umar. This tipped the scale of the debate, and Umar was elected as the new Caliph. Over the next 10 years, Umar would lead the Caliphate. He would conquer the lands of Persia, Mesopotamia, the Levant, and Egypt, and he would give Islamic civilization its own unique identity. Umar was a theologian as influential as Saint Paul, and he was a statesman and a patron of philosophy, much like Lorenzo de Medici. But Umar was also a social reformer like Karl Marx, and a military thinker equal to Napoleon. Welcome to Caspian Report by me, Shirvan. In the lifetime of the second Caliph Umar, the state had expanded tremendously. Islamic social institutions and Islamic jurisprudence was taking shape, and the reign of Umar was filled with discovery and adventurism. When Uthman came to power, he had to collect taxes, repair bridges, run courts, set salaries, and manage all the dull affairs of the Caliphate. But in history, more often than not, the smallest and the most dull decisions can have the most profound long-term effects. For the Caliph, the first order of business was to settle the state's finances. The revolts eventually ended through various methods. Some regions accepted to pay a tribute, some settled for autonomy, but some regions, for example in Tabaristan, the local population was crushed, enslaved, and massacred. In brief, the reconquest of the former Sassanid provinces was actually bloodier than the initial conquest during the reign of Umar. All in all, the Caliphate had made minor territorial expansions during the reign of Uthman. That is because the Caliph was no military man, and he left all the military affairs in the hands of the local commanders.
And we see Uthman, the third caliph, used violence in subjugating his own people. And he used this violence to suppress people who were upset. This is his own Muslim community. Now, Uthman was a money man, right? He had all the connections. His family had a lot of money. He put his family in positions of political power. And that led to violence. It led to civil wars. And notice that Uthman did not spread Islam while he was the caliph. Why? Because he was not a military leader. which proves that the way Islam spread in the beginning was by the sword.
Over the course of 12 years, the admired Caliph Uthman was now receiving objections and complaints from all over the Caliphate. Financial extortion, corruption, and heavy taxation were the leading grievances. In Egypt, Uthman's foster brother Abdullah, the very same Abdullah who had replaced Amr ibn al-Ahaz as governor and of whom al-Ahaz had warned off, was extorting the local population so severely that riots had erupted. The local Egyptian traders, merchants, and notables formed a coalition and wrote a letter to Caliph Uthman asking for the dismissal of the governor. Some time went by and the notables received no answer in return, and so they decided to send a large delegation to petition the Caliph in person. But once again Uthman refused them, and instead the Caliph left the talks and retired to his private chambers and did what he always did, pray and read the Quran. Outside, the crowd, overwhelmed with anger and a sense of injustice, turned to violence. They broke down the door of Uthman's residence and burst in screaming, and there they found Uthman, settled in the corner of his study room with a little lamp, reading the Quran. At the age of 80, the Caliph of the Muslims was beaten to death by his fellow Muslims.
And we see Uthman was assassinated by his fellow Muslims. Again, this is civil war. Muslims fighting against each other just years after the death of Muhammad, and Islam claims that these are the four rightly guided caliphs that lived like Muhammad taught them to live. We can see directly how these guys spread Islam by just doing what Muhammad taught them to do. And Islam's claim is that Muhammad is the best person that ever lived, that is the supreme example for all human beings to follow. Dear viewer, what do you think? Is Muhammad the greatest person in the world to follow? Assassinations, wars of conquest. We see this is the history of the caliphs who were following Muhammad.
Abu Bakr, the wise community leader and the founder of the Caliphate, had died from a fever. Umar, the military thinker and the founder of Islamic jurisprudence, was stabbed in his stomach by a mentally disturbed Sassanid slave. And Uthman, the merchant, the builder, was beaten to death in his study room by his fellow Muslims. Now it was the fourth Caliph's turn, but the future for Ali looked bleak at best. Ever since the dispute between Ali and Abu Bakr over the succession of Muhammad, which we discussed in part 1, Ali had gained a fiercely loyal following. And despite Ali's allegiance and loyalty to the first three Caliphs, a large group of Muslims still considered Ali as the only chosen and legitimate successor of Muhammad to the evolution of the Islamic civilization by Caliph Uthman. And in the previous episode, we explained how the Islamic civil war between Caliph Ali and Governor Muawiyah laid the groundwork for the schism between Sunni and Shia Islam. Following Ali's victory in Al Nahrawan against the radical Khawarji group, the latter planned the assassination of the Caliph. 2 years later, a Khajrid follower stabbed Ali with a poisoned dagger. Ali passed away in a few days, but his death left behind a power vacuum and a fragmented state.
And the fourth caliph, we have Ali, who was assassinated. And this is where there is a big split in Islam today. There is still sects in Islam today, divisions, Sunni and Shia. And the Shiites follow, they believe, this is what they believe, that Ali should have been the first caliph. And Sunnis believed everything worked out the way it should have, the first four caliphs. And there's a division still, because there was a civil war where the followers of the other three rightly guided caliphs just pretty much massacred Ali and Ali's family after he was assassinated, and this division still exists today. Shiites believe that Ali should have been the one to succeed Muhammad. And Sunnis disagree. They believe everything worked out the way it should have among the first rightly guided caliphs. Now, I'm not saying which side is correct. I'm not picking a side. I'm just pointing out that there has been wars among Muslims from the very beginning, and even today, Sunni and Shia both are at war with each other. Remember, the root of this division goes back to Muhammad. We can blame it on Muhammad. He's the one that taught these caliphs how to operate, how to be political, how to be corrupt, how to be sneaky, how to gain and seize power, and how to use wars of conquest in making other people to follow Islam. And also, Muhammad failed miserably in picking who his successor should be. So all of these things that are going on today between Shiites and Sunnis can be traced back to Muhammad and blamed on him. Is this guide really the best example in the history of mankind to follow? Now let's take a look at Jesus' apostles, who Christianity says that these apostles, they weren't perfect, they weren't sinless, but they did emulate Christ, especially in how to propagate Christianity. And Islam believes, again, the claim is Islam says Muhammad is the best example to follow. Christians say Jesus is the best example to follow, especially in how they went about propagating their respective religions. And Islam teaches that the guys that learned directly from Muhammad did just that. They followed Muhammad and how to spread Islam especially, and the apostles learned from Jesus directly how to spread Christianity. Now, let's take a look at how these apostles lived their lives.
Today, let us focus on what happened to all 13 disciples. Yes, 13, excluding Judas Iscariot, who already died prior to the crucifixion of Christ. We will include 2 other apostles though, Matthias, who replaced Judas Iscariot, and Paul, the prominent apostle to the Gentiles. James is dubbed the Greater to distinguish him from the other apostle James the Less, being the older and taller of the two. James was the first apostle to be martyred and one of the 2 apostle deaths mentioned in the Bible. In the scriptures, it was mentioned that King Herod had him killed by the sword in Jerusalem. This happened around 44 AD. Andrew is the brother of Apostle Peter. He had served several missionary journeys to spread Christianity. The first one is believed to include the route to the important cities of Antioch, Edessa, and Byzantium, which later became Constantinople and eventually Istanbul. He also traveled to the Armenian regions before going back to Jerusalem. His second journey is believed to be much longer and farther. After reaching Antioch, this time he sailed to the island of Cyprus and then to the city of Ephesus and the Greek communities there. He then went eastward towards the empires of Persia and Scythia and into an ancient Central Asian region known as Sogdiana, near the Siberian Altai Mountains. There is a third journey believed to have occurred going to some African regions, although this is not part of James' designated area of preaching. Ethiopian Coptic traditions believe that Andrew had made a trip to the Berber region of Africa, although this has not been definite. The Ethiopian sources also indicated he may have traveled further south to the Great Lakes region, which include the modern-day countries of Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, and Congo. His fourth and last journey is believed to have been to the far north, reaching as far as the areas of modern-day Russia and Poland before settling in Greece. Andrew was martyred around 60 AD in Patras, Greece, by order of the Roman governor Aegeus. Matthew is known for his Gospels. He is one of the 4 evangelists attributed with the creation of the 4 Gospel accounts in the New Testament. Matthew had ministered in Persia and the Mediterranean before going to Ethiopia. There, he was believed to have been stabbed to death. There are other conflicting accounts saying he died of natural causes, but the majority of early records showed that he was martyred. One account indicated that he had been slain with a halberd in the city of Nadaba in Ethiopia in 60 AD. After the Pentecost and the beginning of Christian evangelization, James the son of Alphaeus remained in Jerusalem. It was also believed that he had ministered in the north of Israel on the Syrian communities. Peter, also known as Simon Peter, is believed to have traveled to Antioch, where he established a Christian community. He is also considered as the first bishop of Antioch. He is also believed to have made several journeys, including the southern route going to North Africa and Spain before reaching Rome. Eventually, he was persecuted and martyred by Emperor Nero and was crucified between 62 and 66 AD. Paul, also known as Saul of Tarsus, was not one of the original apostles. He was in fact a Jew who fervently persecuted the followers of Jesus, a mission that changed his life when Jesus had spoken and revealed himself to Paul. Paul came from Tarsus, a Greek-speaking settlement in Cilicia, which was part of the Roman Syria. He began his own Christian movement in this region, including Damascus, Antioch, Asia Minor, and Greece. Paul established churches throughout Asia Minor and Greece. His last journey through the Mediterranean would eventually lead him to Rome. Paul had been attributed at least 7 of the 27 books in the New Testament. The exact details of Paul's death are unknown, but tradition holds that he was martyred and beheaded in Rome. More or less in the same time, Peter was also persecuted. Both of their deaths were perhaps part of the executions of Christians ordered by the Roman Emperor Nero following the Great Fire in the city in 64 CE. Like Peter, Paul was martyred and beheaded in Rome between 62 and 66 AD. There is little known about the journeys of Judas Thaddeus or Jude. It is well established that he had traveled to Syria and Armenia, together with Simon the Zealot. He was believed to have suffered martyrdom around 65 AD in Beirut, Syria, in modern-day Lebanon. As earlier mentioned, Simon had traveled together with Jude to the northern regions. There are numerous claims on how and where he had died. In the 5th century, Moses of Cyrene wrote that Simon the Zealot was martyred in the kingdom of Iberia in the Caucasus region. The text from the Golden Legend says he was martyred in Persia in 65 AD after refusing to sacrifice to the sun god. Thomas is known in the Bible as the doubting apostle, because he questioned the resurrection of Jesus until he saw him with his wounds. Thomas is believed to have traveled east to Syria and Mesopotamia to preach the gospel and spread Christianity, reaching as far as India, where the Mar Thoma Christian tradition considers him to be their founder. Their tradition claims that Thomas died in Chennai in 72 AD, with the notion that he was pierced with either a single spear or the spears of 4 soldiers. There is also little known about the evangelization work of Bartholomew. There are accounts indicating that he may have traveled to the Greater Armenia with Judas Thaddeus, Egypt, Ethiopia, Mesopotamia, Arabia, and as far as India with Thomas. There are many theories as to how Bartholomew died, including being drowned in the ocean in India, but the most popular of this is that he was beaten, skinned alive, crucified, and then beheaded. Years following the Pentecost, Philip also traveled to the Greek communities. There is not much evidence surrounding his journeys, but there are some theories stating that he traveled first to North Africa before going to Asia Minor. He had such a strong ministry that he was able to convert the wife of a Roman proconsul in Asia Minor. He was martyred and died around 80 AD. John is the only apostle thought to have lived through old age and died of natural causes. Jesus entrusted his mother Mary to John when he was crucified, and John stayed with her, although it wasn't clear until when or if he brought Mary with him during his travels. John traveled to Ephesus and established a church there. A Christian writer from the late 2nd and early 3rd century named Tertullian wrote that before the Romans banished John, they brought him into a colosseum and plunged him in a vat of boiling oil. When he emerged unharmed, the entire colosseum converted into Christianity. Later, he was exiled to the island of Patmos for preaching the gospel during the anti-Christian persecution under the Roman Emperor Domitian. It is there it was believed that he had written the book of Revelation. After receiving the revelation from Christ himself, he went back to Ephesus, where he died between 98 and 100 AD. Matthias was chosen by the apostles to replace Judas Iscariot after Jesus ascended into heaven and before the Pentecost. He was chosen by casting lots, a Jewish tradition to determine the will of God. He was believed to have initially ministered in Judea, in the regions of Cappadocia, particularly near Assus, and along the coast of the Caspian Sea. He also traveled to the region of Colchis, in modern-day Georgia, where it was believed he was stoned to death. These are the 13 apostles that had been entrusted to spread the good news of Christ. Together with the other disciples who joined Jesus throughout his preaching in Judea, they have endured through all the adversities. No matter how these apostles died, they have truly served the purpose of Christian ministry. They knew that they were called to suffer to learn the path to eternal salvation. Their legacy continued as Christianity spread throughout the Roman Empire and beyond.
The men who Jesus picked directly spread Christianity by sharing the truth with other people, by sharing the message of the gospel. And this is how Christianity spread, by sharing, by preaching. And the apostles also did many miracles which helped in spreading the gospel in the early years. So we see how they ended up, how their lives were taken from them just for following the Lord Jesus. So I'm asking you, dear viewer, which example was the best to follow? We can ascertain which religion is true in this case because each religion claims to be the true religion. And each religion claims that their respected founders is the best example for all people, and that includes you, to follow. Muslims claim that Muhammad was the best example. Christians say that Jesus was the best example. And each religion claims that the people that learned and were taught by their respective leaders did just that. They carried out their religion the way they were taught. So you can be the judge which religion is true, which religion rings true to you. Which one was spread by violence? Which one was spread by love for other people and spreading the truth? Now, after this time period, I'm not even looking at all the stuff each side has done. Okay, that's irrelevant to this discussion. This discussion is about each people, the men, each persons that were taught directly from their leaders how to live out their religion and spread their religion. Which one is true? My claim is it's obvious that Jesus is the supreme example to follow. And here is the gospel message that these apostles died for. And it's still being preached today. And it's still the way Christianity should be spread today is by following Jesus and what he taught. And this is what Jesus taught: that he is Lord, that he is the Son of God who came to earth. He's pre-existent. He created everything. Everything in the universe was created by Jesus Christ, the second person of the Trinity. He became a man specifically for you to die on a cross for your sin. And he was buried, and 3 days later he rose from the dead to prove that he is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. That is the gospel message. And that's what I'm sharing with you today. It is the truth. And you can leave Islam. If you're a Muslim and you're watching this video, you have enough within you, in your spirit, in your soul, and in your conscience to know that Muhammad is not the greatest example for people to follow, and that Jesus really was the greatest example, because he died for everyone's sins who has ever lived, so that anyone who calls upon the name of the Lord Jesus Christ shall be saved. Will you do that today, dear Muslim? Leave Islam behind and call upon the name of the Lord Jesus to save you today. If you do that, my dear Muslim friend, you will never regret it.